The Whitmore estate sprawled across 12 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, its marble fountains catching the afternoon sun like diamonds scattered across emerald lawns. Inside the mansion's east wing, a nursery had been prepared that would make European royalty jealous. Hand-painted murals of enchanted forests, a custom Italian crib that cost more than most family cars, temperature-controlled air that maintained a perfect 72 degrees. Everything gleamed with the perfection that only unlimited wealth could buy. The newest addition to the Whitmore dynasty, 6-month-old Emma Rose, should have been thriving in this palace of privilege. She should have been cooing, laughing, reaching those chubby baby hands toward the elaborate mobile of crystal butterflies above her crib. But she wasn't. Instead, Emma was dying. Slowly, mysteriously, impossibly, this baby born into every advantage was wasting away in her golden cage. And despite the parade of specialists, despite the cutting-edge equipment, despite Katherine Whitmore's desperate searches through the night for answers no one could provide, no solution had been found. But there was one person in that house who saw what everyone else missed. One person whose eyes weren't blinded by medical degrees or clouded by assumptions. One person no one was paying attention to. Katherine Whitmore had everything the world said she should want. At 34, she stood at the helm of her family's luxury hotel empire, having transformed 20 properties into 50 within 5 years. Forbes called her a visionary. Business Insider featured her in their 40 under 40 list. She lived in a house with 17 bedrooms, most of which she'd never slept in, and employed a staff of 12 to maintain a lifestyle she barely had time to enjoy. Her husband, Richard, managed the financial side of their empire from offices in Manhattan, commuting home on weekends when merger negotiations didn't keep him trapped in boardroom warfare. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. When Emma Rose arrived, after 3 rounds of IVF and 8 years of trying, Katherine had believed she could apply her boardroom excellence to motherhood. She'd researched, planned, and executed the perfect pregnancy. She'd hired the nation's top pediatrician before Emma was even born. She'd installed state-of-the-art monitoring systems in the nursery. She'd done everything right. But nothing was right. Emma had been healthy at birth, 7 pounds, 4 ounces of perfection, with Richard's dark hair and Katherine's green eyes. The first month passed in the exhausted blur common to all new parents, wealthy or not. But by the second month, Katherine noticed Emma wasn't gaining weight the way the charts predicted. By the third month, the baby had stopped reaching for toys. By the fourth month, Emma's cries had weakened to whimpers. Now at 6 months, Emma was smaller than she'd been at 4 months, her skin pale as porcelain, her eyes dull and unfocused. Dr. Harrison Chen had been the first specialist, a pediatric gastroenterologist with credentials spanning 3 continents. He'd arrived with cutting-edge diagnostic equipment and unshakable confidence. He'd tested Emma for reflux, allergies, enzyme deficiencies, metabolic disorders. He'd adjusted her formula 6 times in 3 weeks, each change promising to be the solution. He'd prescribed medications that cost $3,000 per bottle. Nothing worked. After 5 weeks, Dr. Chen had stood in the Whitmore's marble-floored foyer, his confidence cracked like old paint. "I'm recommending a colleague," he'd said, unable to meet Katherine's desperate eyes. "Dr. Patricia Vance. She's seen cases that defied conventional diagnosis." Dr. Vance arrived with her own array of specialists, a pediatric neurologist, an immunologist, a geneticist. They'd turned the nursery into a temporary laboratory, drawing vials of Emma's blood, monitoring her sleep patterns, analyzing her DNA for rare disorders. They'd found nothing. Emma continued to fade, her tiny body rejecting every feeding attempt, her weight dropping into dangerous territory. "Sometimes," Dr. Vance had finally admitted, her voice heavy with defeat, "we encounter cases that don't fit any known pattern. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore, I truly am." Dr. Michael Torres specialized in failure-to-thrive cases. He'd written 2 textbooks on infant nutrition and saved dozens of babies that other doctors had given up on. He approached Emma's case with methodical precision, tracking every ounce of formula, every diaper, every moment of sleep. He'd implemented feeding schedules down to the minute. He'd brought in occupational therapists to work on Emma's oral motor skills. He'd tried different bottles, different nipples, different temperatures. After 6 weeks, Emma had lost another pound. At 6 months old, she weighed barely 11 pounds, the size of a 3-month-old. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, blue veins visible beneath the surface like rivers on a map. Her whimpers had become so faint that Katherine sometimes held a mirror beneath Emma's nose just to confirm she was still breathing. Dr. Torres had left without a formal goodbye, his failure sitting heavy in the silence. Dr. Sarah Kim had been next, a homeopathic pediatrician who believed Western medicine had become too disconnected from holistic care. She'd brought herbs, acupressure techniques adapted for infants, specialized probiotics harvested from ancient cultures. Katherine, by now willing to try anything, had allowed it all. Emma grew worse. Dr. James Burton, a pediatric psychiatrist, had suggested the problem might be psychological, that somehow Emma was refusing to eat as a response to stress in her environment. He'd analyzed Katherine's mental state, Richard's absence, and the energy of the household. He'd recommended family therapy, reduced stimulation, and something called attachment feeding. Nothing changed, nothing helped. By the time Emma was 6.5 months old, Katherine had stopped sleeping entirely. She'd moved into the nursery, keeping vigil through the night, listening to Emma's shallow breathing, watching her tiny chest rise and fall with alarming slowness. Richard had started staying in the city more frequently, unable to bear watching his daughter waste away. The household staff moved through the mansion like ghosts, speaking in whispers, avoiding the east wing where Hope went to die. That's when Maria Delgado arrived. She wasn't supposed to be significant. The agency had sent her as a temporary replacement, the regular housekeeper's niece, filling in while her aunt recovered from surgery. Maria was 43, with silver threading through her black hair and hands that bore the calluses of a lifetime of labor. She'd worked as a maid in hotels, hospitals, and private homes across 3 states. She had no degrees, no credentials, no reason to understand what 5 specialists with their combined centuries of education could not. Katherine barely noticed her the first day. Maria was simply another person moving through the house, carrying cleaning supplies, changing sheets, vacuuming carpets with efficient silence. She wore simple clothes, dark pants, a white polo shirt, comfortable shoes that made no sound on the marble floors. She was the kind of person the wealthy learn not to see, part of the infrastructure that makes their lives possible but rarely acknowledged. But Maria noticed everything. Maria had been working in wealthy homes long enough to recognize the signs of a household in crisis. The desperate look in Katherine Whitmore's eyes, the untouched food trays outside the nursery door, the way the other staff members spoke in hushed tones and avoided the east wing. She'd seen it before in different forms. Tragedy wore similar clothes regardless of tax brackets. On her first day, Maria had been assigned to clean the second-floor hallways, which gave her a clear view into the nursery when the door was open. She'd caught glimpses of the elaborate room, the expensive equipment, and the impossibly small baby lying motionless in her designer crib. But Maria had learned long ago not to ask questions, not to involve herself in the private matters of her employers. She was there to clean, not to observe, not to interfere. But Maria noticed something no one else saw. It happened on her 3rd morning while she was polishing the hallway mirrors near the nursery door. Katherine was inside with the baby, and through the partially open door, Maria watched as the mistress prepared a bottle of formula. Katherine's movements were precise, practiced, the result of months of desperate repetition. She measured the powder exactly, added the warmed water, shook it with the rhythm of someone who'd performed this action thousands of times. Then she'd fed Emma, or tried to. The baby had taken perhaps an ounce before turning her head away, a weak protest against nourishment her body desperately needed. Katherine had tried again, her voice breaking as she pleaded with her daughter to eat. "Please, baby, please, just a little more." Emma had refused, and Katherine had finally given up, setting the bottle aside with shaking hands. She'd stood, walking to the window with her shoulders curved in defeat. That's when Maria saw it. Katherine had left the nursery for just a moment, stepping into the adjoining bathroom, and in that brief window, someone else had entered. Vivienne Marsh glided into the nursery with the silent confidence of someone who belonged there. She was Katherine's personal assistant, a position she'd held for 3 years, ever since Katherine's previous assistant had quit to get married. Vivienne was 31, beautiful in a calculated way, blonde hair always perfectly styled, designer clothes that somehow looked both professional and subtly seductive, nails manicured to glossy perfection. She managed Katherine's calendar, handled her personal correspondence, and organized her life with ruthless efficiency. Everyone agreed that Katherine couldn't function without Vivienne. Maria watched through the mirror's reflection as Vivienne approached the crib. Her expression was unreadable, not concerned, not sympathetic, just blank. She looked down at Emma for a long moment, then her hand reached for the bottle Katherine had left on the side table. What happened next lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Vivienne picked up the bottle, examined it, then reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. Maria couldn't quite see what. Vivienne's body blocked the view as she did something to the bottle, something quick and practiced. Then she set it back down exactly where Katherine had left it and walked out of the nursery, passing so close to Maria in the hallway that Maria caught the scent of her perfume, something expensive and cold, like winter jasmine. Their eyes met for a brief second. Vivienne's gaze was cool, assessing, dismissive. Then she was gone, her heels clicking down the marble stairs. Maria stood frozen, her polishing cloth forgotten in her hand. Had she really seen what she thought she'd seen? It had happened so fast, so casually. Maybe Vivienne had just been checking the bottle's temperature, or what? Maria's mind raced through possibilities, none of them innocent, all of them terrifying. She should say something. She should tell Mrs. Whitmore what she'd witnessed. But what had she witnessed, exactly? A personal assistant touching a bottle. There was nothing concrete, nothing she could point to as evidence of wrongdoing. And she was nobody, a temporary maid, easily replaced, easily dismissed. Who would believe her over Vivienne, the indispensable assistant, the trusted confidant? Maria returned to her cleaning, but her hands trembled as she polished the mirror. Over the next 3 days, Maria watched. She couldn't help herself. She arranged her cleaning schedule to be near the nursery during feeding times. She found excuses to work in the East Wing, to be present but invisible, the way domestic workers learn to be. And she saw it happen again and again. Vivienne entered the nursery when Katherine was distracted, a phone call from Richard, a conversation with the house manager, a moment of exhausted sleep. Each time, Vivienne's actions were the same. Approach the prepared bottle, add something from her pocket, leave without a trace. The entire operation took less than 10 seconds. It was so smooth, so practiced, that Maria realized this had been happening for a long time. Weeks. Maybe months. Whatever Vivienne was putting in Emma's bottles was killing her. The realization hit Maria like a physical blow. She'd been standing in the hallway folding towels when the understanding crystallized, and she'd had to grip the linen cart to keep from staggering. A baby was being poisoned. Slowly, deliberately, systematically, and Maria was the only one who knew. That evening, after her shift ended, Maria sat in her small apartment above a bodega in Bridgeport, staring at her phone. She should call the police. She should call Child Protective Services. She should do something. But what if she was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation she couldn't see? What if Vivienne was adding some kind of medication, some treatment the doctors had prescribed? Maria didn't know these people, didn't understand their world of private physicians and complicated medical interventions. And even if she was right, who would listen to her? She had no proof, no evidence beyond what she'd glimpsed in mirrors and doorways. She could already imagine the scene, police arriving, Katherine defending her trusted assistant, Vivienne producing some perfectly reasonable explanation. And Maria, she'd be fired, probably blacklisted from the agency, unable to find work in private homes again. At 43, with no college degree and a resume of domestic work, she couldn't afford to lose this job. But a baby was dying. Maria began documenting everything. She couldn't install cameras or collect physical evidence. That was beyond her capability and would certainly get her fired. But she could observe, remember, and write it all down. She bought a small notebook and kept it in her cleaning cart, jotting down details whenever she was alone. Dates, times, exactly what she'd witnessed. June 3, 10:15 a.m., Vivienne entered the nursery while Mrs. W was on the phone, approached bottle on warming station, added something, left. The baby fed 30 minutes later, refused most of the bottle, and vomited after. June 5, 2:30 p.m., Vivienne entered during Mrs. W's nap. Same pattern, baby lethargic all evening. June 7, 9 o'clock a.m., Vivienne very quick this morning. Mrs. We only stepped out to speak with the house manager for 2 minutes. V added substance to 2 bottles in the refrigerator. The pattern was undeniable. On the days Maria observed Vivienne tampering with the bottles, Emma's symptoms worsened. On the one day Vivienne was out of the house, accompanying Katherine to an unavoidable board meeting in Hartford, Emma had seemed fractionally better, taking slightly more formula, her whimpers a bit stronger. But Maria needed to know why. Why would anyone poison an innocent baby? Why would Vivienne, who seemed to have everything, a prestigious job, a generous salary, Katherine's complete trust, want to harm Emma? The answer came from an unexpected source. Gossip among the household staff. Maria had been eating lunch in the kitchen with Martha, the cook, and James, the groundskeeper. They'd been discussing the tragedy of Emma's illness when Martha mentioned something that made Maria's blood run cold. "It's such a shame," Martha said, cutting vegetables with swift, practiced strokes. "Mrs. Katherine was going to make some changes around here before Emma got sick. Fresh start, she called it." "What kind of changes?" Maria asked carefully. James chuckled. "The kind where people get replaced." Katherine was starting to notice that things weren't running as efficiently as they should. Money disappearing, vendors overcharging, that sort of thing. She'd hired an accountant to audit the household expenses. Martha nodded. Vivienne was nervous about it. "I overheard her on the phone in the pantry one day, talking to someone about the audit. Said something like, 'If they look too closely, I'm finished.'" "When was this?" Maria's voice was steady, but her heart hammered. "Oh, about 8 months ago, right before Mrs. Katherine got pregnant. Then Emma was born, and with all the baby preparation, Katherine dropped the audit idea, said she'd deal with it after maternity leave. 8 months ago, Emma was now 6.5 months old. The timeline aligned with horrifying precision. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, putting together a picture that made her sick to her stomach. Vivienne had been embezzling from the Whitmores. Katherine had discovered discrepancies and was about to expose her. Then Emma was born, and Katherine's focus shifted entirely to her baby. The audit was postponed, forgotten in the chaos of new motherhood, but Vivienne knew it would eventually resurface. As long as Katherine was focused on Emma, she was safe. And if Emma required all of Katherine's attention indefinitely, if the baby's mysterious illness kept Katherine too distracted and exhausted to think about household finances, Vivienne wasn't just poisoning a baby. She was buying time. She was keeping Katherine so consumed with fear and desperation that she couldn't focus on anything else. Every specialist who failed, every treatment that didn't work, every pound Emma lost, it all served Vivienne's purpose. Maria knew she had to act, but she also knew she needed concrete proof. Her observations, her notes, they weren't enough. She needed to know exactly what Vivienne was putting in those bottles. The opportunity came on a Wednesday morning. Vivienne had just completed her daily tampering and left the nursery, heading downstairs to take a business call. Katherine was in the bathroom, the door closed. The tampered bottles sat on the warming station, waiting to be fed to Emma within the hour. Maria's hands shook as she entered the nursery. She'd brought a small plastic container in her pocket, the kind used for salad dressing, barely an inch across. Moving quickly, She poured a small amount of formula from the bottle into the container, sealed it, and tucked it back in her pocket. Then she used a fresh, disposable wipe to clean any traces she might have left, and slipped out of the nursery as quietly as she'd entered. The entire operation had taken less than 30 seconds, but Maria felt like she'd run a marathon. She returned to her cleaning cart, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Now she had a sample, but what was she supposed to do with it? She couldn't afford a professional laboratory analysis. She didn't know anyone with the expertise to identify poison. She was just a maid. That afternoon, during her break, Maria called the one person she thought might help. Her nephew, Daniel, who worked as a pharmacy technician at a hospital in New Haven. She'd helped raise Daniel after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. He was 30 now, with a degree in chemistry and a kind heart that reminded Maria of his mother. "Tia," Daniel said when he answered, his voice warm with surprise. "Everything okay? I need your help," Maria said quietly, standing outside the mansion where no one could overhear. "And you can't ask me questions." There was a pause. "That sounds serious." "It is. I need you to test something for me, confidentially. I think there might be something bad in it." Another pause, longer this time. "Bring it to me after your shift. I'll be at the hospital until 9. Maria nearly wept with relief. Daniel met her in the hospital parking lot after sunset. He took the sample container without comment, though his dark eyes searched his aunt's face with concern. "I'll test it tonight," he said. "Are you in danger?" "No," Maria lied, "but someone might be." He nodded slowly. "I'll call you as soon as I know something." Maria barely slept that night. She kept imagining Emma's tiny body, growing weaker with each poisoned bottle. How much time did the baby have left? Days? Weeks? Every moment Maria waited felt like betrayal, but she needed proof. She needed something that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Daniel called at 6:47 a.m., waking Maria from restless half-sleep. "Tia," he said, his voice tight with shock. "Where did you get this sample? What did you find?" "Ipecac syrup, high concentration. Do you know what that is?" Maria's hand tightened on her phone. "Tell me." "It's used to induce vomiting. It was common in medicine years ago, but we don't use it much anymore because it's dangerous if misused. If someone's been consuming this regularly," he paused. "Maria, if this is being given to a child, you need to call the police right now." "How dangerous?" "Extremely. It causes dehydration, electrolyte imbalances, muscle weakness, and heart problems. If given repeatedly over time, it can cause permanent damage or death, especially in an infant." Daniel's voice was urgent now. "Who is this for? What's going on? Can you put your findings in writing? Official with your credentials?" "Yes, but do it. Email it to me today. I'll explain everything later, I promise." She hung up before he could protest, her mind racing. Ipecac. Vivienne had been dosing Emma's formula with Ipecac syrup, causing the baby to vomit up nutrition, slowly starving her. It was insidious. The symptoms would look like a feeding disorder, a mysterious failure to thrive. No wonder the specialists couldn't figure it out. They'd been looking for disease, for genetic abnormalities, for natural causes. None of them had suspected intentional poisoning. Maria had her proof now, but she still faced the same problem. Who would believe her? Maria arrived at the mansion that morning with Daniel's official report printed and folded in her pocket. The paper felt heavy, like it was made of stone rather than fiber. She'd rehearsed her speech 100 times during the bus ride from Bridgeport. She would go to Katherine, show her the evidence, explain what she'd seen. Katherine would listen. She had to listen, but when Maria arrived, she found the mansion in chaos. An ambulance was parked in the circular driveway, its lights silent, but its presence screaming emergency. Maria rushed inside to find paramedics carrying a stretcher down the grand staircase. On it lay Emma, so still and pale she looked like a porcelain doll. Katherine followed, her face a mask of terror, still in her nightgown, barefoot on the cold marble. "She stopped breathing," Katherine was saying, her voice high and brittle. "I went to feed her and she wasn't breathing right." Martha stood in the foyer, tears streaming down her weathered face. James had his arm around her shoulders. The other household staff clustered in doorways, watching the nightmare unfold. And there, standing at the top of the stairs, was Vivienne. Her expression was perfectly calibrated, concerned but composed, supportive but professional. She was already on her phone, presumably calling Richard, managing the crisis with her usual efficiency. As the paramedics loaded Emma into the ambulance, Vivienne's eyes swept across the assembled staff and landed on Maria. For just a moment, something flickered in Vivienne's gaze: recognition, assessment, and something else, a warning. Maria felt ice creep down her spine. Vivienne knew, somehow she knew that Maria had figured it out. The ambulance pulled away, Katherine climbing in beside her dying daughter. Richard would meet them at the hospital. Vivienne would coordinate everything from home, notifications, arrangements, whatever crisis management was required. She was indispensable, after all. As the staff dispersed, returning to their duties in shocked silence, Vivienne approached Maria. She moved with predatory grace, stopping just inches away, close enough that Maria had to look up to meet her eyes. "You're the new cleaning girl," Vivienne said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Temporary, right." "Just filling in." "Yes, ma'am." Vivienne smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Well, with all this chaos, I'm sure the agency will understand if we end your assignment early. No need to come back tomorrow. I'll make sure you receive payment for the full week." Maria's mouth went dry. She'd pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence at the lower end of the spectrum, 20 years, with possibility of parole after 15. During her allocution, she'd apologized to the Whitmores, to Emma, to everyone she'd deceived. She'd explained that the embezzlement had started small, just tiny amounts to cover gambling debts from an addiction she'd hidden successfully for years. But it had spiraled, as such things do, until she'd been trapped by her own crimes, willing to do anything to avoid exposure. "I thought of her as a friend," Katherine had told Maria afterward. "I shared things with her, trusted her with my home, my schedule, my life, and the whole time she was stealing from me. And when that wasn't enough, she tried to destroy my family." "I'm sorry," Maria had said, because there was nothing else to say in the face of such betrayal, but Katherine had surprised her. "I'm not anymore. I was, at first. Angry, hurt, betrayed, all of it. But then I realized something. Vivienne's betrayal brought you into our lives. Her crime revealed who I could really trust, and it taught me to see people, really see them. Not their job titles or their credentials or their clothes, but who they are, what they're willing to do when no one's watching." Now, sitting in her new office, Maria thought about that lesson. She'd accepted the Whitmore's offer after careful consideration and negotiation. She wasn't going to be taken advantage of just because she was grateful. She'd negotiated a fair salary, clear responsibilities, and the condition that she would never be asked to do anything that compromised her integrity. Richard had laughed and said those were terms he could easily accept. Her first task had been hiring new household staff, people she'd vetted carefully, checking references thoroughly, trusting her instincts about character. Martha and James had stayed on, delighted with the change in management. The rest of the staff were new, chosen not for their resumes but for their honesty, their work ethic, their kindness. Emma, now 8 months old, had made a complete recovery. She was chubby and happy, hitting all her developmental milestones right on schedule. She'd even started saying "mama" and reaching for her mother with enthusiastic baby joy. Katherine had reduced her work hours, spending more time at home, more time being present. Richard had restructured his schedule too, working from home 3 days a week, unwilling to miss any more of his daughter's life. The audit of household finances had revealed the full extent of Vivienne's embezzlement, not just the $347,000 they'd initially discovered, but closer to $500,000 over 3 years, all carefully hidden in vendor invoices and service contracts. It was a staggering amount, though barely a dent in the Whitmore fortune. But it wasn't about the money, Katherine had said. It was about the violation, the betrayal, the evil that had walked through her home wearing a friendly face. 3 months after Emma came home, the Whitmores held a quiet dinner party, just family, a few close friends, and Maria, who'd become much more than an employee. Daniel had been invited too, his role in the investigation acknowledged and appreciated. The table was set simply, the food prepared by Martha, the atmosphere warm and genuine in a way the mansion had never felt before. During dessert, Katherine stood and raised her glass. "I want to propose a toast," she said, her voice carrying across the intimate gathering, "to Maria, who taught us what it means to truly see. And to Emma, who survived because one person cared enough to look." "To Maria and Emma," the guests echoed, glasses clinking. Later, as Maria helped clear the table despite Martha's protests, Katherine pulled her aside. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation," Katherine said. "Something focused on protecting vulnerable people, children, elderly, anyone who might be in situations where abuse or neglect could be hidden. I want to train healthcare workers, domestic workers, teachers, anyone who has access to private homes, to recognize signs of intentional harm, to know when something that looks like illness or accident might actually be a crime. And I want you to help me run it." Maria considered the offer. "I'm not qualified to run a foundation. You're qualified to see what others miss. That's the most important qualification." Katherine smiled. "Besides, we'll hire professionals to handle the technical aspects. But I need someone who understands what it's like to be the person who sees something wrong and doesn't know if they'll be believed. Someone who knows the risk it takes to speak up. That's you. Can I think about it?" Maria asked, echoing her response from months earlier. "Always," Katherine said. "I'll never push you into something you're not ready for. But Maria, I think this could help a lot of people. I think it could prevent other families from going through what we went through. And I think you could be the face of that change, showing people that heroes don't always come with medical degrees or badges. Sometimes they come with cleaning supplies and the courage to trust what they see." Maria thought about all the homes she'd worked in, all the things she'd seen and not said, all the times she'd kept her head down and her mouth shut, because that was how you survived as a domestic worker. She thought about Emma, about how close they'd all come to a tragedy that would have been called medical mystery instead of murder. She thought about other babies, other vulnerable people, other Emmas who might be suffering right now while the people around them looked but didn't see. "I'll do it," Maria said, "but on one condition. Name it. We include training on how to report suspicions without fear of retaliation. We help people understand their rights, protect them legally and financially if they speak up. The biggest reason people don't report what they see is because they're afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of lawsuits, afraid no one will believe them. We need to fix that fear." Katherine's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. Yes. Absolutely yes." And so the Katherine Whitmore Foundation for Protecting the Vulnerable was born, with Maria as its director of training and advocacy. The foundation grew quickly, funded generously by the Whitmores and other families who'd experienced similar tragedies. It trained thousands of domestic workers, healthcare aides, teachers, and others who had access to private spaces. It created reporting protocols, legal protections, and support systems. It saved lives, but that was all in the future. 1 year after Maria first walked into the Whitmore estate as a temporary maid, she returned to the mansion for Emma's second birthday party. The celebration was joyful chaos, toddlers everywhere, cakes smashed on happy faces, balloons and streamers, transforming the formal dining room into something wonderfully messy. Emma, now a healthy, rambunctious 18-month-old, tottered around on sturdy legs, her dark curls bouncing, her green eyes bright with mischief. She'd grown into a beautiful child, showing no lasting effects from her traumatic first months. The doctors said it was remarkable that despite prolonged poisoning and starvation, she'd made a complete recovery. "Children are resilient," they'd said, "especially when they're loved and properly cared for." As Emma tore into her presence with enthusiastic destruction, Katherine sat beside Maria on the settee, both women watching the joyful scene. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there?" Katherine asked quietly. "If the agency had sent someone else that week?" "Every day," Maria admitted. "Every single day I think about how close she came. How many times Vivienne poisoned her before I arrived. How she might have died if I'd been too afraid to speak up. But you weren't afraid." "Oh, I was terrified," Maria corrected with a small laugh, "but I did it anyway." "That's not the absence of fear. That's just choosing to do the right thing despite the fear. Katherine nodded slowly. You know what I've learned this year? I've learned that the most important people in our lives are often the ones we take for granted. The ones who clean our homes, care for our children, see our lives up close. We trust them with everything that matters, but we don't really see them. We don't listen when they have something to say. It's changing, Maria said. Slowly, but it's changing. The foundation has trained over 3,000 people now. We've had 17 cases where trained observers caught abuse or neglect, everything from elder financial exploitation to children being harmed by caregivers. 17 people who might still be suffering if someone hadn't learned to see and been brave enough to speak. 17 because of you, Katherine said softly. 17 because of Emma, Maria corrected. She's the one who taught everyone what can happen when we don't pay attention, when we're too busy, too trusting, too certain that bad things happen to other people. Emma chose that moment to toddle over, her face covered in chocolate frosting, her hands sticky with cake. She climbed into Maria's lap with the confidence of a child who'd never known anything but love and safety, curling against Maria's chest with contented exhaustion. "Mama," Emma murmured, though she was looking at Maria, not Katherine. Katherine laughed. "She calls everyone Mama now, me, Maria, Martha, even Richard when she's really tired." "She knows who loves her," Maria said, smoothing Emma's curls. "That's all that matters." Richard appeared with his camera, capturing the moment, Emma asleep against Maria, both of them frosted with cake and happiness, surrounded by the chaos of celebration. It was a photograph that would hang in the foundation's offices eventually, a reminder of why the work mattered, of who they were protecting. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Maria prepared to head home as well. But Katherine stopped her at the door. "Thank you," she said, the words carrying the weight of everything unsaid. "Thank you for seeing my daughter. Thank you for saving her life. Thank you for teaching us all to pay attention. Thank you for listening when I spoke," Maria replied. "Not everyone would have." "I almost didn't," Katherine admitted. "When you first told me what you'd seen, there was a moment, just a split second, where I wanted to dismiss it. Vivienne was my right hand. You were a temporary maid. Everything in my conditioning told me to trust her over you. But then I looked at Emma and I thought, what if she's right? What if I ignore her and I'm wrong? And I realized that my pride, my assumptions, my comfort, none of that mattered more than my daughter's life." "That took courage too," Maria said. "The courage to admit you might have been wrong, might have missed something. A lot of people can't do that. A lot of people lose their children because of it," Katherine said soberly. 2 years had passed since the day Maria first saw Vivienne poison Emma's bottle. The temporary maid job had transformed into a career she'd never imagined, a purpose that gave meaning to all those years of invisible work in other people's homes. The foundation had expanded to 6 states, training programs running constantly, success stories accumulating, children saved, elderly protected, vulnerable people defended by those who'd learned to see and chosen to speak. Emma was now 3.5, a bright, joyful child who loved books and music and had no memory of her traumatic first year. She called Maria, Tia Maria, and demanded bedtime stories that only Maria could tell properly. She was healthy, happy, and wholly loved. Vivienne Marsh remained in prison, serving her sentence, reportedly a model inmate working in the prison library. She'd sent a letter to Katherine once, 2 years into her incarceration, a letter Katherine had shared with Maria. In it, Vivienne had written, "I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that every day I think about what I did, and I'm grateful Emma survived despite me. I'm grateful Maria was there. I'm grateful someone finally saw." "Do you think she means it?" Katherine had asked after showing Maria the letter. "I think she means it now," Maria replied. "Whether she would have meant it if she'd never been caught, that's a different question." Now, on a crisp autumn morning, Maria stood in the Foundation's training center, watching a new group of domestic workers and healthcare aides take their seats for orientation. They were women and men like her, people who cleaned homes and cared for others, people who saw the intimate details of lives behind closed doors, people who'd often been taught that their observations didn't matter, that their voices weren't important. "You're here because you have access," Maria began, the opening words of a speech she'd given hundreds of times, but that never felt routine. "You go into homes, hospitals, and facilities where vulnerable people live. You see things that family members don't see. You notice patterns, changes, details that others miss. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, you might see something wrong, something that isn't quite right, something that makes you uncomfortable, but you can't quite explain why." She paused, making eye contact around the room. "When that happens, your instinct might be to stay quiet, to tell yourself you're imagining things, to convince yourself it's not your place to question, to worry about losing your job or being sued or not being believed. That's normal, that's human, but that's also how people get hurt. That's how children get abused. That's how the elderly get neglected. That's how vulnerable people suffer while everyone around them looks but doesn't see." Maria clicked to the next slide, a photograph of Emma at 3 years old, healthy and happy. "This is Emma. When I first met her, she was 6 months old and dying. 5 specialists couldn't figure out why. Her wealthy, loving parents were desperate for answers. She was in the best hospital, getting the best care, surrounded by people who wanted to help. But she was still dying, because the person who was supposed to be trusted was the one hurting her, and no one was watching that person. Everyone was watching the baby." She let that sink in, watching recognition dawn on faces around the room. These were people who knew what it meant to be overlooked, to be assumed harmless or ignorant or unimportant. "I was a temporary maid," Maria continued. "Nobody important, nobody special. I was just there to clean, but I watched. And I saw, and I spoke up, even though I was terrified, even though I thought no one would believe me. And because I did, Emma lived. She's healthy now, thriving, completely recovered. But she's only alive because someone paid attention to the person no one else was watching." Maria clicked a new slide, statistics on abuse detection by trained observers. "In the 2 years since we started this foundation, over 5,000 people have gone through this training. And you know what we've learned? Those crimes hide in plain sight. That abuse happens in mansions and apartments, to children and elderly, by people who seem trustworthy and normal. And that the best defense, sometimes the only defense, is someone who sees and has the courage to report what they see." She spent the next hour teaching them practical skills. How to document observations, how to recognize patterns of abuse versus accidental harm, how to report suspicions through proper channels, and how to protect themselves legally while protecting others practically. But the most important lesson couldn't be taught through slides or handouts. "Trust yourself," Maria said as the training concluded. "Trust what you see. If something feels wrong, if your gut says something isn't right, don't dismiss it just because you don't have a degree or because you're just a maid or aide or nanny. You see things that others don't. You have access to truth that hides behind closed doors, and sometimes you might be the only person in a position to save someone." After the training, several participants approached Maria with questions, with gratitude, with their own stories of times they'd seen something wrong and hadn't known what to do. She listened to each one, offered guidance, and provided resources. This was the work now, not just training people to see, but supporting them when they did. That evening, Maria returned to the Whitmore estate for dinner, a weekly tradition now. Emma greeted her at the door, launching herself into Maria's arms with the uncomplicated joy of a child who knew she was loved. Tia, I drew you a picture." The picture was abstract, lots of colors, lots of enthusiasm, not much recognizable content. "It's beautiful," Maria said honestly, because it was. It was the picture of a healthy child whose life had been saved because someone cared enough to look. Over dinner, Katherine shared news about the foundation's expansion into 3 more states. Richard discussed the legal protections they'd managed to push through the state legislature. Protections for whistleblowers, mandated training for domestic workers, clearer reporting channels for suspected abuse. Emma chatted about her day at preschool, demanding everyone's attention with the tyranny of a beloved child. It was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, a family dinner, an evening of sharing and laughter and connection. But it was a dinner that almost never happened, a child who almost didn't survive, a family that almost shattered, a tragedy that was prevented because one person looked where others didn't. Sometimes I think about parallel universes, Katherine said as they cleared the table. Timelines where you weren't here that week, where someone else came to clean who didn't notice or didn't care, where Emma, she couldn't finish the sentence. Don't, Maria said gently, don't torture yourself with what-ifs. We're in this timeline, Emma is alive, and we're using what happened to protect other people. That matters. It does, Katherine agreed. But Maria, I also want you to know that beyond all the big important work, beyond the foundation and the training and the lives saved, you gave me my daughter. You gave her back to me, and that's everything. That's literally everything. As Maria left that evening, walking to her car under a star-filled sky, she thought about the journey from temporary maid to foundation director, from invisible domestic worker to recognized advocate. It had been improbable, unlikely, almost accidental, but it had happened because she'd made one choice, the choice to see and to speak and to act despite fear. How many people right now, in houses across the country, were in positions to see harm being done? How many were looking but not seeing? How many were seeing but staying silent? And how many lives could be saved if more people learned the lesson Emma had taught, that the most important voices are often the quietest, the most overlooked, the ones we don't think to listen to? The work would continue. The foundation would grow. More people would be trained, more vulnerable individuals protected. But it had all started with one woman, one baby, and one moment of choosing to trust what her eyes and heart told her was true. Sometimes, the most profound changes begin not with power or money or influence, but with a single act of courage by someone the world has learned not to see. Sometimes heroes carry cleaning supplies instead of badges. Sometimes justice is served by the person no one was paying attention to. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, if we're very brave, we become the person who sees what others miss and speaks up for those who cannot speak for themselves. That is the lesson Emma taught. That is the gift Maria gave. And that is why, even now, the Foundation's motto echoes in training centers across the country: watch, see, speak, save. Because somewhere right now, someone is suffering. And somewhere someone is in a position to see it. The only question is whether they'll have the courage to act. Maria did, and Emma lived. So tell me, if you were in his shoes, mocked and underestimated, would you have revealed your success or walked away in silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that flip the script on arrogance. She was being fired, quietly, politely, but unmistakably fired. And once she was gone, she'd have no access to the house, no way to protect Emma, no credibility if she went to the police. She'd be the disgruntled former employee making wild accusations against a respected professional. "I'll stay until my contract ends Friday," Maria said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "The agency requires proper notice." Vivienne's smile sharpened. "That won't be necessary." "It's in my contract," Maria repeated. "If I leave early without notice, I don't get paid. I need this job, Miss Marsh. Surely you can understand that." The two women locked eyes. Maria could see Vivienne calculating, weighing options. If she insisted too hard on Maria leaving immediately, it might raise questions. Better to let the maid finish out the week, keep everything looking normal. After all, what could a cleaning woman do in 3 days? "Fine," Vivienne said at last, "through Friday, but stay out of the family's private areas. Stick to the common spaces." "Yes, ma'am." Vivienne walked away, her heels clicking like a countdown. Emma survived the ambulance ride. The hospital stabilized her, pumping tiny veins full of fluids and nutrients, placing her in the pediatric intensive care unit where machines monitored every heartbeat, every breath. Katherine never left her daughter's side. Richard arrived from Manhattan, haggard and aged 10 years overnight. The doctors were baffled but hopeful. If they could keep Emma stable, if they could figure out what was wrong, there was still a chance. But Maria knew that the moment Emma came home, Vivienne would try again. The assistant had too much at stake now. The audit would eventually resurface, and with it, evidence of embezzlement, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned off over the years. Vivienne's entire life, her reputation, her freedom, all depended on keeping Katherine too distracted to notice. And if Emma died, there would be an investigation, certainly, but of medical causes. No one would look for poison. No one suspected Vivienne, no one except Maria. That night, Maria sat in her apartment with Daniel's report spread on her small kitchen table. She'd added her own documentation, the notebook with dates and times, a written statement of everything she'd witnessed. It felt inadequate, fragile. Paper and words against a woman with money, connections, and the trust of a powerful family. Maria thought about her own life, her years of invisibility in other people's homes. She thought about every time she'd swallowed words, every injustice she'd witnessed and ignored, because speaking up meant losing work. She thought about her nephew Daniel, who'd gone to college because Maria had worked 3 jobs to help pay his tuition. She thought about her sister, Daniel's mother, who'd always said, "God sees what others overlook." She picked up her phone and called Detective Sarah Chen at the Fairfield County Police Department. Maria had met Detective Chen 3 years ago when a house she'd been cleaning was burglarized. The detective had been kind, thorough, and had actually listened when Maria provided observations that helped solve the case. "Detective Chen," the voice answered, professional and alert despite the late hour. "This is Maria Delgado. We met a few years ago, the Riverside Drive burglary." A pause. "I remember. What can I do for you, Miss Delgado? I think a baby is being poisoned, and I know who's doing it, but I don't know if anyone will believe me." The words tumbled out in a rush, all of Maria's fear and urgency pouring through the phone. Detective Chen listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss, just let Maria tell the entire story from beginning to end. When Maria finished, there was a long silence. "You're talking about the Whitmore baby," Detective Chen said finally. "It's been in the news, mystery illness, specialists baffled." "Yes, and you have a sample that tested positive for ipecac. My nephew analyzed it. He's a pharmacy technician. I have his written report." Another pause. "Miss Delgado, this is serious. If you're right, we're talking about attempted murder. But if you're wrong, you could be sued for defamation, and the Whitmores have very expensive lawyers." "I know what I saw. Your sample, where did you get it?" "I took a small amount from a bottle that Vivienne had just tampered with. Before it was fed to Emma. That could be challenged in court. Defense could argue contamination, mishandling, chain of custody issues." Detective Chen's voice wasn't discouraging, just realistic. "But combined with your eyewitness testimony, it might be enough for a warrant. Maybe. What do I need to do? Can you come to the station tomorrow morning? Bring everything you have. We'll make an official statement, and I'll speak with my lieutenant about next steps." "But Maria," the detective's tone softened. "Be prepared for this to get complicated. The Whitmores are influential. Vivienne Marsh probably has a clean record, good references. This won't be simple." "A baby's life isn't simple," Maria said quietly. "No," Detective Chen agreed. "It isn't. I'll see you at 9 a.m. Maria spent the night organizing her evidence, making copies of everything, rehearsing her statement until she could recite it without stumbling. She barely noticed the hours passing until dawn light crept through her windows. At 8:30 a.m., she received a text from Katherine Whitmore's personal number, a number Maria had only ever seen on interoffice communications, never used directly. "Come to Greenwich Hospital immediately. Ask for an ICU. KW." Maria's heart stopped. Was Emma worse? Had she died? She called Detective Chen, explained the text. "Go," the detective said. "I'll meet you there. Do not confront Vivienne Marsh or make any accusations until I arrive." "Understood, understood." Maria caught the earliest bus to Greenwich, her evidence folder clutched to her chest like armor. Greenwich Hospital's pediatric ICU occupied the 4th floor of the East Tower. Maria gave her name at the nurse's station, and to her surprise, was immediately escorted to a small consultation room near the unit. Inside, Katherine Whitmore sat with shoulders curved in exhaustion, her silk blouse wrinkled, her perfectly styled hair hanging limp around a face stripped of makeup. She looked like someone who'd aged a decade in 3 days. Richard stood by the window, his back to the room, staring out at nothing. When Maria entered, Katherine looked up with red-rimmed eyes. You're Maria, the new cleaning girl. Yes, ma'am. Maria remained standing, uncertain. Sit down. Please, Katherine gestured to the chair across from her. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, regardless of the consequences. Maria sat slowly, her evidence folder on her lap. Katherine leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Have you noticed anything unusual in my house? Anything at all involving Emma? The question hung in the air like smoke. Maria's mind raced. This was the moment. She could speak now, tell Katherine everything. But Detective Chen had said not to make accusations until she arrived. What if Maria revealed what she knew and Katherine didn't believe her? What if Vivienne had gotten to Katherine first, planted seeds of doubt about the temporary maid? Mrs. Whitmore, Maria began carefully, before I answer, I need you to understand that I have no agenda here. I'm nobody important. I'm just someone who cleans your house. But I've been watching, and I've seen things that I think you need to know about. Richard turned from the window. His eyes were haunted but sharp, the eyes of a man who'd made billions by reading people, by knowing when to trust his instincts. Tell us, he said, so Maria did. She told them everything, laying out the timeline, the observations, the pattern of Vivienne's actions. She described each instance she'd witnessed, the dates and times from her notebook. She explained about the sample, about Daniel's analysis, about the ipecac. She pulled out the report, the documentation, and laid it all on the table between them. Your daughter isn't sick, Maria said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. She's being poisoned by someone you trust. The silence that followed was suffocating. Katherine stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Richard's face had gone white. Vivienne, Katherine's voice cracked on the name. You're saying Vivienne has been poisoning my baby? Yes, ma'am. Why would she? Katherine couldn't finish the sentence. Maria explained about the embezzlement, the postponed audit, the motive. It all sounded insane spoken aloud, like a soap opera plot too dramatic to be real. But the evidence was there, laid out in Daniel's scientific analysis and Maria's careful documentation. This is impossible, Katherine whispered. I've known Vivienne for 3 years. She's been in my home, at my table, managing my life. She helped me plan Emma's nursery. She sent flowers when Emma was born. She's been the one holding me together through all of this, and you're telling me, her voice broke entirely. Richard moved to his wife's side, placing a hand on her shoulder, but his eyes never left Maria. Can you prove any of this? He asked bluntly. In a court of law? I don't know, sir, but Detective Sarah Chen from Fairfield County Police is on her way here now. She has my formal statement. She can tell you what happens next. As if summoned, there was a knock on the consultation room door. Detective Chen entered, her badge visible on her belt, her expression professional and alert. She introduced herself to the Whitmores, then turned to Maria. I need to speak with you separately, Miss Delgado, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore. I'll have questions for you as well, but first I need to verify some details with Miss Delgado. The detective led Maria to a different room, smaller, more sterile, clearly designed for difficult conversations. She pulled out a recording device. I need your official statement, everything you told me on the phone, plus anything new. Take your time and be precise. Maria talked for 45 minutes, walking Detective Chen through every observation, every detail, every piece of evidence. The detective asked clarifying questions, took notes, and examined the documents Maria provided. This is solid, Detective Chen said finally, not airtight but solid. Combined with the baby's medical records and the timing of Vivienne's access, we can get a warrant. We'll search her apartment, her office, look for ipecac, and financial records of embezzlement. If we find anything, you'll arrest her. If we find anything, we'll bring her in for questioning. The arrest comes after that, if the evidence supports it. Detective Chen studied Maria with respect. You took a hell of a risk, Miss Delgado. A lot of people in your position would have looked the other way. A lot of people probably did, Maria said quietly. Everyone sees something. Most people just don't want to see it. Detective Chen moved quickly. By noon, she had a search warrant for Vivienne Marsh's apartment in Stamford and her office in the Whitmore estate. By 2 p.m., a team of investigators had descended on both locations. Katherine and Richard had returned home under police escort, partially for questioning, partially because they needed to be present while their property was searched. Maria wasn't there. Detective Chen had advised her to stay away, to let law enforcement handle it from this point. But she'd called Martha, the cook, who provided updates in whispered phone calls from the mansion's kitchen. They found files, Martha breathed into the phone at 3:15 p.m. Boxes of financial records in Vivienne's office, hidden behind a false panel in her filing cabinet. And Maria, they found ipecac. 3 bottles of it in her apartment, in a locked box under her bathroom sink. Maria closed her eyes, relief and horror washing over her in equal measure. She'd been right, and Emma could be saved. Is she there? Vivienne, she was. The detective asked her to come to the mansion to clarify some administrative details. Vivienne walked right in, cool as ice. She has no idea what they know. The confrontation happened in the Whitmore's library, a room lined with leather-bound books that no one ever read, furnished with antiques that existed solely to project wealth and taste. Katherine sat in a wingback chair, her face a mask of betrayed fury. Richard stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Detective Chen and 2 uniformed officers positioned themselves near the door. And Vivienne stood in the center of the room, her confusion gradually shifting to alarm as she took in the scene. "Katherine, what's going on?" Vivienne asked, her voice perfectly pitched between concern and confusion. "Martha said you needed to see me urgently." "Sit down, Miss Marsh," Detective Chen said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Vivienne sat, her eyes darting between the detective and the Whitmores. "I don't understand. We found the ipecac," Katherine said, her voice shaking, "in your apartment, the same substance that's been poisoning my daughter for 6 months." The room went silent. Vivienne's face cycled through emotions, shock, denial, calculation, before settling on an expression of wounded innocence. "What? That's insane. I don't know what you're talking about." "We also found the financial records," Richard added, his voice flat and cold. $347,000, embezzled over 3 years through inflated invoices and vendor kickbacks. Vivienne's composure cracked, just for a moment. But she recovered quickly, her mind clearly racing through options, through strategies, through lies that might still save her. "This is a setup. Someone is framing me. Why would I hurt Emma? I love that baby." "You love your freedom more," Detective Chen said. "You knew Katherine was about to audit the household finances. You knew you'd be exposed. So you created a distraction, a sick baby who required all of Katherine's attention. Every day Emma got sicker was another day you stayed safe." "That's ridiculous. You have no proof. We have your fingerprints on the bottles of ipecac," the detective interrupted. "We have financial records in your handwriting. We have security footage from the nursery. Yes, Miss Marsh, there are cameras. The Whitmores just didn't review the footage because they trusted you. But we reviewed all 6 months of recordings this afternoon. We watched you poison that baby 27 times. The number hung in the air like a death sentence, 27 times. 27 deliberate acts of poisoning, 27 moments when Vivienne had chosen to harm an innocent child to protect herself." Vivienne's face went white. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. And then, to Maria's surprise, because Martha was still on the phone, describing everything, Vivienne laughed. It was a broken, bitter sound. "You want to know the funny part?" Vivienne said, her voice edged with hysteria. "I almost stopped. Last week, when Emma went to the hospital, I thought, this is enough. She'll take months to recover. That's enough time. But then I overheard Richard on the phone talking about resuming the audit next quarter. And I realized it would never be enough. There would never be enough time." "So you were going to keep poisoning her," Katherine said, her voice breaking. "Forever, until she died." Vivienne met her employer's eyes. "I didn't think she'd die. I measured everything carefully, just enough to keep her sick, keep you distracted. I researched ipecac dosages for months before I started. I thought I could control it." "You thought you could control poisoning an infant?" Richard's voice rose, control finally fracturing. "You thought you could. he couldn't finish, turning away, his shoulders shaking. Detective Chen stepped forward, her handcuffs already out. Vivienne Marsh, you're under arrest for attempted murder, child endangerment, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda rights washed over the room like a final judgment. Vivienne didn't resist as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She looked almost relieved, as if some terrible burden had finally been lifted. As the officers led her toward the door, she looked back at Katherine one last time. I'm sorry, Vivienne said, and perhaps she even meant it. I know that doesn't help, but I'm sorry. Katherine said nothing. She sat frozen in her chair, tears streaming down her face, grieving not just for her poisoned daughter, but for her own blindness, her own trust that had been so thoroughly betrayed. After Vivienne was gone, after the police had packed up their evidence and left, Katherine finally moved. She stood on trembling legs and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds, the fountains sparkling in afternoon sun, the world that looked perfect and was anything but. Where's Maria? She asked quietly. At home, I think, Richard said. The detective told her to stay away during the arrest. Find her, Katherine said. Bring her here, now. An hour later, Maria stood in the same library where Vivienne had been arrested. She'd taken 2 buses to get there, declined the car Richard had offered to send, needing the time to process everything that had happened. Now she stood before the Whitmores, still in her simple clothes, still holding herself with the careful posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime knowing her place. Katherine crossed the room and did something Maria never expected. She took Maria's calloused hands in her own soft ones and held them gently, reverently, as if they were precious artifacts. You saved my daughter's life, Katherine said, her voice thick with emotion. You didn't know us. You had no reason to risk your job, your reputation. You could have been sued, fired, discredited, but you did it anyway. She's a baby, Maria said simply. What else could I do? Exactly what 99% of people would do: nothing. Look away, convince yourself it wasn't your problem. Katherine's eyes searched Maria's face. How did you see it? How did you see 5 specialists, what I myself didn't see? Maria thought about her answer carefully. I think sometimes people who are invisible learn to see what others miss. The specialists were looking at Emma. You were looking at Emma, but I was looking at the whole room. I saw the people around her, the patterns, the things that didn't fit. Nobody was watching Miss Marsh because nobody thought they needed to. Richard joined his wife, his own eyes damp. We owe you more than we can ever repay, but we'd like to try. Name your price. I don't want money, Maria said, the words surprising even herself. I want to know that Emma will be okay. The doctors say she should make a full recovery now that they know what's wrong, Katherine said, a genuine smile breaking through her tears. They're flushing the toxins from her system, giving her proper nutrition. She's already stronger than she was yesterday. They think she can come home in a week. Relief flooded through Maria, so intense it nearly buckled her knees. That's all I wanted. Nevertheless, Richard said firmly, you'll be compensated, and if you're interested, we'd like to offer you a permanent position, not as a maid, as head of household operations, managing the estate and staff, with a salary commensurate with someone we trust with our family's safety. Maria stared at them, shocked. I don't have the qualifications for. You have the qualification that matters most, Katherine interrupted. You have integrity, you have courage, you have the ability to see what needs to be seen. Everything else can be learned. Maria thought about her small apartment, her bus routes, her years of scrubbing other people's floors. She thought about this offer, not charity, but recognition, not pity, but respect. Can I think about it? She asked. Take all the time you need, Richard assured her, but Katherine shook her head. Actually, there's one thing we need immediately. Would you come with us to the hospital? I want Emma to meet the woman who saved her life. Greenwich Hospital's pediatric ICU looked different than it had that morning. The lights seemed softer, the beeping monitors sounded less ominous. Or perhaps it was just that hope had returned to these hallways, pushing back the shadows that had gathered for so long. Emma's room was private, painted in soothing pastels, filled with flowers and stuffed animals sent by well-wishers. Once word got out that the Whitmore baby was finally improving. The baby herself lay in a specialized crib, no longer alarmingly pale, but flushed with returning health. She'd gained 3 ounces in 2 days, a small number that meant everything. IV lines fed her nutrients her damaged digestive system could finally absorb. Her eyes, which had been dull and unfocused for months, now tracked movement with alert curiosity. When Katherine lifted Emma from the crib, the baby didn't cry. Instead, she made a small sound that might have been contentment, her tiny fingers curling and uncurling with new strength. "Look, Emma," Katherine whispered, turning so the baby could see Maria. "This is Maria. She's the one who helped Mommy find out how to make you better." Emma stared at Maria with solemn green eyes, and then, miraculously, she smiled. A real smile, toothless and pure, the smile of a baby who was finally going to be okay. Maria felt tears spill down her cheeks. She'd held so much inside for so long, the fear, the uncertainty, the weight of knowing something terrible and being powerless to stop it. But now, seeing Emma smile, watching Katherine hold her daughter with joy instead of desperation, it all released. "Thank you," Katherine said again. "Thank you for seeing her. For seeing us." Over the next week, as Emma continued to improve, Maria visited the hospital daily. Katherine had insisted, and Maria found she couldn't stay away. She watched Emma gain weight, watched her reach for toys, watched her laugh, actually laugh, when Richard made funny faces. She watched a family knit itself back together after coming so close to being torn apart. On the day Emma was discharged, the hospital threw a small celebration. Nurses who'd cared for the mystery baby for months gathered to see her leave not just alive, but thriving. Dr. Torres, the specialist who tried so hard and failed only because he'd been looking for disease rather than crime, came to apologize to the Whitmores and to meet Maria, the woman who'd succeeded where he could not. "You have a gift," he told Maria, "the gift of observation without assumption. I made assumptions based on my training. You simply watched and saw the truth. You tried to help," Maria said gently. "That matters too." The media, of course, got wind of the story. It had everything they loved: wealthy family, trusted employees' betrayal, heroic maid, baby's miraculous recovery. Reporters camped outside the hospital, outside the Whitmore estate, outside Maria's apartment building. But the Whitmore's lawyers created a protective barrier, allowing only one carefully managed press conference where Katherine thanked the observant household staff member who saved our daughter, without naming Maria explicitly. Those who wanted privacy could keep it. Those who'd betrayed trust would face public judgment. Vivienne's arrest made national news, her face on every channel, her crime dissected by legal analysts and psychologists. "She'll go to prison for a long time," Detective Chen told Maria during a follow-up interview. "Attempted murder of a child, especially a prolonged, calculated case like this, she's looking at 25 to life. And the embezzlement charges will run concurrently, so effectively, her life as she knew it is over." "Does it make me a bad person that I feel a little sorry for her?" Maria asked. "It makes you human," the detective replied. "You can recognize someone as a criminal and still understand they're a person who made terrible choices. That's wisdom, not weakness." 6 weeks after Vivienne's arrest, Maria stood in the Whitmore estate's newly redecorated study, her study now, the place from which she'd manage household operations. The room was smaller than Katherine's executive office, but lovely nonetheless, with a window overlooking the garden and a desk that had been chosen specifically for her. On the wall hung a framed photograph. Maria holding Emma, both of them smiling, taken the day the baby came home from the hospital. The trial had been swift once Vivienne's lawyers saw the evidence against her.